So, for whatever reason, you have wandered into a Presbyterian church this morning. And if you know anything about Presbyterianism, you know that the name is derived from how the church is governed. How, that is, by presbyters or elders, who have been elected by the body to represent for a set period of time. Now, for sure, the pastor has a job to do and has responsibilities to fulfill, but they are not the ones in charge. Decisions are made in partnership with each other. And for all of the talk of Presbyterians doing things decently and in order, this sort of thing is messy, really messy. Running a church, running any organization by consensus takes a lot of energy. It'd be a lot easier just to force the pastor to make decisions or to be directed by a bishop or a superintendent. You know, somebody else we could blame. But that's not how Presbyterians operate. No one person is in control, which means we're all in charge. We are a denomination comprised of councils and committees. And as such, committee jokes never fail to garner giggles and knowing glances in Presbyterian circles, like when the elder in charge of the children's ministry at a local church was reporting on the efforts to hire nursery staff. It went like this. I'm excited to report that although we still can't find anyone willing to volunteer in the nursery, we have identified 7 people who are willing to serve on the search committee to find someone to volunteer in the nursery. True story. So this got me thinking. Imagine our Luke 15 reading, except when Jesus tells the parable of the lost sheep, instead of going out to find that lost sheep, the shepherd called a committee meeting. Okay, now that we're in this, we're going to ramp up the realism to 100%. So, the committee of the First Church of the 99 gathers in Fellowship Hall with coffee and donuts and a whiteboard. No, not an expensive modern whiteboard. It is a flip chart with markers. And at the top of the first sheet of that ancient and yellowed paper is scrawled, Strategic Outreach to Missing Livestock. And now the fun begins. Ruling Elder Francine is feeling a bit overwhelmed by this huge task at hand, and so she suggests that perhaps a subcommittee needs to be formed in order to assess the terrain. That's all fine and good. But Ruling Elder Chuck insists that the real issue at hand is the need to draft a resolution condemning irresponsible sheep behavior. Teaching Elder McGillicuddy, attending in an ex officio capacity, gently reminds the group of the core message of the gospel and redirects the group back to the task at hand, finding the one. But not before the youth representative proposes a TikTok campaign entitled #BringBack. So, suffice it to say, after 2 full hours of lively debate, somebody brings up liability issues, while another suggests that what is really needed are thoughts and prayers that the sheep will simply find its own way back home. So finally, the group votes to table the search until the 4th quarter, contingent on budget approval, of course. And all the while, the sheep is still out there, cold, wandering around, scared, wondering if anyone among the 99 has even noticed that they've gone missing. Thankfully, while the righteous church committee debated and waited, Jesus didn't wait for the motion to be adopted or even for it to be seconded. He just went. He left the 99 and searched until that one was found. And that, my friends, is the kind of urgency that we need in our world today. Not in our bylaws, but in our bones. But it would be easier to look at the world and to blame this or that for the hellscape that we tolerate. It's much easier to debate the causes, to make up cute and brutal names, to demonize the opposition, rather than actually engage in the God-demanded task of confronting injustice, opposing evil, and agape-loving neighbor. We heard from Luke today, and we heard from the psalmist today as well, Psalm 14. Both of these passages are incredibly relevant for us today, but maybe not in the way that might be thought. Both of these readings, perhaps, probably, are familiar passages for us. Far too familiar, so familiar that they can become like that dingy wall that we've become so used to that the dirt's no longer even noticed. You know how it is. You walk past that stained carpet so often that the stain is no longer even noticed. You ignore that clunky user interface because you've just learned how to work around it. That once upon a time alarming squeak and structural groan every time your car moves no longer even registers. The stains disappear until company's coming. Your coworker sits down at your desk and goes, "How can you stand to work with this?" Your friend refuses to even sit in your car, let alone ride in it, for fear that it will have a rapid, unscheduled disassembly event at any time. We no longer notice what we've grown accustomed to. And this is why it's a good thing. It's a crucial thing to open the curtains on these texts from time to time, to let fresh sunlight to shine brightly on them in a different way. Especially on familiar texts like these, the lost sheep, that we know, that we already have figured out, that have come to have a plain and clear meaning, unadulterated. Yeah, right. So let us embark. Because, friends, dear friends, it seems that we gather week after week after week in the shadow of grief. The steady drumbeat of violence continues to erupt in our streets, on our campuses. The school shooting of the generation has become the school shooting of the day after day after day. We cry out, "How long, O Lord?" And into this anguish this morning, the psalmist speaks. Fools say in their heart, "There is no God." This isn't a philosophical musing about atheism, of whether or not God exists. No, that's not the question here. It's a moral indictment as to whether or not we are living in a way that acknowledges the irrefutable existence of something, of God. The fool here is not unintelligent. Rather, the fool here is unaccountable, living as if God's justice and compassion and empathy and welcome and inclusion do not matter. Living as though compassion and empathy are even somehow sinful, rather than being the very core of God's heart. Jesus 1:01. This psalm speaks of a society where the vulnerable are devoured, where the poor are mocked, where people suffer. Sound familiar? Yeah. On Friday, during our community conversation and prayer on Facebook, 10 o'clock, we talked about the lectionary. Somebody put in the comments, asked, "Why do you always use the lectionary?" About why Pastor Laura and I faithfully follow the lectionary each week instead of just choosing what we feel like preaching on. Well, this Sunday is no exception as to why I almost always stick with the lectionary. Not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Really, really hard. I don't know how. I can't explain it, but week after week after week, the lectionary passages continually speak into the very soul of the times. And this week's no different. It happened again. I don't have to say this because we all know it. But we're living in a season marked by political violence and the absolute horror of school shootings. Headlines remind us day after day after day after day that something deep within our society has gone terribly awry. Fears soar, grief mounts, and too often we turn on each other. In these dark moments, the biblical voice of lament and urgent calling pierces our despair. And if we're paying attention, if we squint through our tears, our lectionary readings today, read so wonderfully by Diane, come into focus. Psalm 14 lays bare our collective folly. And Luke 15 unveils God's relentless pursuit of every lost person. And together, these two lectionary texts summon us out of comfort, out of complacency, out of our committee meetings and gossip sessions and blame fests to join in the divine search and rescue mission. The psalmist is unmasking a moral collapse, foolishness steeped in violence and injustice that eats up God's people, which is everyone. So listen, hear Psalm 14 again. This is Eugene Peterson's translation from the Message. Bilious and bloated they gas. God is gone. Their words are poison gas, fouling the air. They poison rivers and skies. Thistles are their cash crop. God sticks God's head out of heaven and looks around. God's looking for someone who's not stupid. Just one person even. God expectant. Just one God-ready person. And God comes up empty, a string of zeros. Useless, unshepherded sheep taking turns at pretending to be the shepherd. The 99 follow their guy. Don't they know anything, these predators? Don't they know they can't get away with this, treating people like a fast food meal that they're too busy to even pray over? Night is coming for them, and nightmares too. For God takes the side of victims. Do you think you can mess with the dreams of the poor? You can't. For God makes their dreams come true. Psalm 14, not just some ancient text from a long ago time. When brutality is incited for power, or when a shooter turns a classroom into chaos, we see the horror described in Psalm 14 in its modern form. And verse 3, there it is. All have gone astray. Reminding us that no one, not me, not you, no one stands innocent. In our context, the call is for God's restorative work to sweep through our communities, sweep through our congregations, sweep through our land, heal our divisions, and bring real safety. In Luke 15, we catch a glimpse into the divisions of Jesus' day. We find Jesus dining with tax collectors and sinners, people labeled as moral outcasts by the church folks of the day. Now, thanks to Augustine of Hippo in the 4th and 5th century and his idea of original sin, thanks to that, over the centuries, we've come to have quite a different notion about what a sinner is than what Luke is actually talking about. There's truth in Augustine's idea. We are indeed all sinners, as Paul points out in Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Da, 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 da. But even that doesn't acknowledge all of the baggage that we have attached to the word sinner in the ensuing millennia, especially in the past 150 years or so here in America. Because Luke's concept of eating with sinners is different from how we would think of it. Because in Luke's time, sinner did not mean someone who occasionally messes up while trying to do better. In Luke's context, that would be a description of the righteous folks. In context, sinner for Luke is a social category, a source of societal division for justifying exclusion. Those deemed impure, unworthy, outside of the covenant. Tax collectors were collaborators with the government, with Rome. Never a good idea. Sex workers, lepers, the diseased, the disabled, the ritually unclean. These were those labeled as sinners, regardless of the contents of their heart and yearning and desire to do good. Those things had no bearing on the designation of sinner. And conversely today, in our North American context, we hear sinner and think of a personal moral failure. But in Luke's context, it's all about exclusion. Who's in, who's out. These were the people the church folk of the day refused to touch, refused to see, refused to search for. So, who are the righteous? Who are the church folk? In this parable, I think they're the 99. And here's a bit of irony. Actually, the irony is thick. The righteous, the 99, may actually be the most lost of all. So secure in their moral standing, so certain of their theological correctness, that the need for grace is kind of pushed off. It's no longer recognized. There is no searching. There is no rejoicing. Since at least the 1930s, probably before, but at least since the 1930s, the word woke has meant to be acutely alert to the realities of injustice. And we've entered into a dangerous and shameful time when these ideas are debated. They're mocked and have even become politicized, of all things. The question I ask right now, though, are we spiritually awake enough to leave the 99 and search for the one? Are we awakened enough that we will risk comfort, reputation, or even just convenience for the sake of one lost soul? Are we awake enough to leave our echo chambers and listen to others that the algorithms are trained to demonize for us? Are we awake enough to listen to those whose politics, race, or trauma make us uncomfortable? Are we awake enough to see that the sinner might be the one that God is calling us to embrace, and that our own righteousness might just be the very thing keeping us from grace? The parable of Jesus demands more than awareness, though. It demands relocation. Moving from the safe 99 into the dangerous wilderness where the one has strayed. And our culture does celebrate outrage on social media. But the true test comes when we quietly shoulder the lost and carry them home, defying those who loudly and too often violently demand the opposite. Jesus tells of a shepherd who left the flock to find the one lost sheep, tells a story of the woman who turns her house upside down to find one coin. And when they find what was lost, they throw a party. And these words of Jesus are not just about individual salvation, whatever that means, whatever that looks like. These stories, this psalm, are about communal restoration, about a society that rejoices when the marginalized are brought home, that rejoices when the stranger is welcomed, that rejoices when the wounded are healed, that rejoices when the forgotten are remembered, with the shepherd's courage, with the woman's diligence, leaving no one behind. Which one of you?